I'm joined by Todd Clear, who is the Dean of the School of Criminal Justice at Rutgers University, also author of 12 books, including Imprisoning Communities. Really great to have you on today. You know, we've been talking about incarceration quite a bit on this program over the years, and I've kind of been focusing on three issues. And what I would love to do is tell you what they are, and then you tell me if you think I'm missing some key issues that I'm not talking about when it comes to incarceration. One has been incarceration in conjunction with the war on drugs and the disproportionate effect it has on minorities. Number two has been how private prisons, including the ownership stakes in them by big Wall Street firms, has furthered unproductive legislation in terms of detention of nonviolent drug offenders as well as undocumented immigrants. And then three has been solitary confinement and just the disastrous effects that it can have on individuals and really set them up to never again be so-called productive members of society. So evaluate my coverage of prisons and tell me, are these important issues? What am I missing?
So the drug war is a key. In 1976, about 3% of the people who are incarcerated were in on drug charges. And about less than 10% of the people entering prison came in on drug charges. Today, it's about a third, and about half of the people who come into prison. And that's been entirely produced not by changes in drug use, but in changes in sentencing in the way we sentence people who get convicted for possession of drugs. It used to be rare that a person who was caught with a controlled substance went to prison. It's now the rule rather than the exception. So that is a key. The private prison industry is interesting, but only about 15% of the prisoners nationally are in some sort of private facility. So it's not the main engine driving incarceration rates. Incarceration rates are entirely produced by two numbers: how many people go to prison and how long they stay. And we've been increasing the rate of people going to prison and increasing the length of stay in prison for almost 40 years. And the private prison industry has been a beneficiary of growing prison populations. It's created a market, but they have not been a driver. Now, there have been some states that have experimented or thought about experimenting with large increases in private incarceration, like Arizona. And that would be an enormous mistake. You'd create a permanent lobby for growing prison populations, but that really doesn't exist in any meaningful way in the states. There are plenty of issues about private incarceration that I think we could pay attention to, but they're not a main driver of mass incarceration. Really, what has driven the incarceration growth in the United States has been changes in the way we sentence people. In 1972, about 3/4 of the people who were convicted of a felony got sentenced to probation. Today, about 3/4 get sentenced to prison. So that's been cut by by 2/3. In 1972, the median length of stay of a sentence was about 15 months. It's now about 30 months. So you can understand why you have a prison population that is so much larger, even though the crime rate is about what it was in 1972. And that's because we send a lot more people to prison and we make them stay there longer.
If you had to pick the specific battle to fight that you think would have the biggest positive impact on the kind of status quo of incarceration in the U.S., is it where would you attack it if you could only focus on one area?
It'd be a tough call between changing sentencing for people convicted of drug crimes and eliminating mandatory minimum sentences. Both of those have contributed their own enormous piece to the problem of mass incarceration, and they're related because some of the mandatory minimum sentences are for drug crimes, but they are targeting a slightly enough different group that you could do something about. If you said that nobody can go to prison for possession of drugs, you would have an impact on mass incarceration, but it would be smaller than you would think because people who go to prison for possession of drugs tend to stay there not very long. Mandatory minimum sentences, on the other hand, are quite significant because not only are you not being placed on probation, but you're also typically being sentenced to much longer than the judge would ordinarily impose. So mandatory minimums in the federal system, for example, are 10, 20, and 30 years. And if you eliminated those and allowed judicial discretion for choosing sentences lower than those mandatory minimums, you would have a significant impact. So it'd be a tough call between those two. I'd take either one of those. If you force my hand, I would say that there is that a mandatory minimum sentence to prison is not allowed. And if that were always the case, that a person could make that you could make a case for a community-based penalty for any person convicted of any crime, I think, or a lesser sentence than what the law provides as a maximum for any crime, I think you'd have more impact on mass incarceration generally. If we went back to the sentencing laws of 1980, within a very few years, we would have the prison population of 1980.
If we put aside just for a second the disproportionate application of on minorities, when we look at these mandatory minimums, drug crimes, we look at higher drug usage rates among whites, but higher incarceration rates for drug usage among minorities. Putting that aside just briefly, let's imagine that weren't the problem. I get emails from people on both sides of the political spectrum saying, listen, we understand all of this minority disproportionate stuff, but when you put people in prison, they aren't committing crimes, so it is still better for the surrounding community. Is that even true? Can we even say that accurately?
Yeah, and the answer to that is increasingly it's becoming clear that that is not a meaningful argument. It used to be that, it makes sense on the face. You lock a person up, that person can't commit crimes. But there are two mechanisms that really reduce that's usually called the incapacitation effect of a prison sentence. One is replacement. Most crimes that are committed in communities are committed by young men in groups. And if you incarcerate one person from that group, you may have no impact on the group's level of criminal activity. In other words, the number of crimes that actually get committed. And what you may do actually is open up a place for someone else to join in who might not have been involved in that criminal network to now become involved. This is particularly true of drug-related crimes. When you lock up a person for selling drugs, you don't prevent a single drug from being sold. You just create a job opening for somebody else to sell drugs. And when you do this in a framework where there are lots of guns, you create not only a job for selling drugs, but also you arm somebody who might not have been armed. So you can see why, and this is, by the way, true for burglaries, many robberies, lots of car thefts. A lot of the kinds of crimes that we are very worried about in urban environments are committed by people in groups, and incarcerating individuals doesn't do much about that rate. That's how come we can have a six-fold increase in the number of people locked up today as compared to the 1970s, and yet still have the same crime rate we had in the 1970s.
Is there some other intangible detriment that also takes place because you're breaking families up and you're kind of changing the social dynamics of the neighborhood? Could we say something about that as well?
Well, that was the other thing I was going to say, that we now know that sending a person, first of all, incarceration concentrates itself significantly in a small number of communities, so that for example, in Chicago, 2/3 of the people who go to prison come from 7 of the neighborhoods in Chicago, that kind of thing. And there are neighborhoods where the rates are so high that as many as 1/4 of the adult men are locked up on any given day, but the people who are locked up change from day to day. So some people are released from prison and come back, and other people are removed from the community to go to prison. What that means is that you have a neighborhood in which men are not a stable part of the neighborhood environment. So let me just lay out a few statistics. We know that going to prison reduces your lifetime earnings by 40%. If you're a child coming from a neighborhood where most men go to prison at some time, you come from a neighborhood where men have 40% less earning power, meaning that there's 40% less money to spend on you as a child, to produce businesses in that community, to increase economic activity, to make sure that homes are taken care of, to buy the things that kids need to go to school, on and on and on. We also know that having a parent go to prison reduces your chances of being involved as a child, reduces your chances of being involved in the juvenile justice system. I'm sorry, let me say that again. We know that going to prison increases the chances of a child going to the juvenile justice system by 1/4. So when you have a community in which every child is connected to an adult who's been to prison, you have a community in which all those children are more vulnerable to the juvenile justice system being arrested. We also know that it increases the chance of physical health problems. We know that it increases the chance of emotional problems. We know, for example, that in neighborhoods where Lots of people are cycling in and out of the prison system. Sexually transmitted diseases are at a much higher rate because intimate relationships between men and women have been destabilized. So if you add all these things up together, you get a situation in which incarceration policies, which have dramatically increased the number of people going to prison from some inner city neighborhoods, have the impact of making those neighborhoods less stable and increasing the level of the contributors to criminality in those neighborhoods. That's why you can have nationally a drop in crime rate, but in some neighborhoods the crime rate stays very stubbornly high, and it's partly because incarceration has made it hard for those neighborhoods to develop the kind of stable social patterns that really produce public safety.
Yeah, so not only do we have to look at the kind of cultural and punitive and rehabilitative aspects of these prison sentences, but there's significant economic aspects as well over time to these neighborhoods. We've been speaking with Todd Clear. He's the Dean of the School of Criminal Justice at Rutgers University, author of 12 books, including Imprisoning Communities. Really great to speak to you today.
Thank you.